Hello friends, myself Akshay Swami. I am from Asansol, West Bengal. We will talk about the homeopathic aggravation. Basically, we are discussing here the Kant's lecture. So we will be sticking more towards what Dr. Kant wrote. First of all, he quotes the aphorism number 154 of the Organon, in which the last clause says, "A disease that is of not very long standing ordinary yields without any great degree of suffering to the first dose of this remedy." By this he wants to say that in acute disease we seldom see anything like striking aggravation unless the acute disease has drawn near death's door or is very severe, unless it has lasted many days and breaking down of blood and tissues is threatened or has taken place. Then we will see sharp aggravations, great prostration, violent sweating, exhaustion, vomiting and purging following the action of the remedy. I have seen most severe reaction which seemed to be necessary to recovery. That was the observation of Dr. Kant. Such a state in acute disease where it has gone many days without a remedy and a great threatening is present will be to an acute disease what many years would be to a chronic disease of long standing. Now the question is, what do we understand by long standing? By long standing we means a matter of progress. If we say a disease of much progress or of considerable ultimates, we understand it better. If the disease has ultimated itself in change of tissue, then you see striking aggravations, even aggravations that cannot be covered from, such as we find in the advanced forms of tissue changes. Example, where the kidneys are destroyed or the liver destroyed, or in phthisis, where the lungs are destroyed. A disease ought always to be well considered as to whether it is acute or chronic, where there are no tissue changes, where no ultimates are present. Then you may expect the remedy to cure the patient without any serious aggravation or without any sharp suffering, for there is no necessity of reacting from a serious structural change where there is a deep-seated septic condition, where pyonia must be the result. You will find sometimes vomiting and purging as a reaction of the vital force of the economy. When order is established, this order, which is attended by reaction, as it were, commences a process of house cleaning. It does itself. The drug does not do it. If a crude substance is used, it is the action of the drug, of course, but the action of the dynamic drug is to turn the economy into order. So a very important thing is to be kept in mind about the dynamic drug and how beautifully the dynamic drug acts on the human economy. So it is with the chronic disease. When the chronic disease has not ultimated itself in tissue changes, you may get no aggravation at all, unless perhaps it be a very light exacerbation of the symptoms. And that slight exacerbation of the symptoms is of a different character. It is the establishment of the remedy as a new disease upon the economy, instead of the reaction which corresponds to a process of house cleaning. Now house cleaning means removing of the symptoms, and the removal of the bad symptoms are done through the homeopathic law of nature that we have discussed in previous modules. Now, elimination must take place, as we know, probably from the bowels or stomach by vomiting, by expectoration or by the kidneys. In those cases where everything has been suppressed, so we all know that suppression is a very dangerous thing. It's threatening. It may look like an aggravation when you have had for years a limb paralyzed from a neuritis. Suppose after you administer a remedy that goes right to the spot, that is in the very highest sense homeopathic or truly specific, that paralyzed limb commences to tingle and creep like the crawling interiorly of ants, tingling sometimes from which he cannot sleep for days and nights. This is due to the reaction of the nerves of the part. So we have also studied in the Organon that it is due to the sentient faculty of the nerves, and nerves play a very important part in the remedy reactions. They're called into new life, into activity. I have seen in paralysis. So this was the observation of Dr. Kant. For example, if you take a child who has lain in a stupor for a long time, from inaction of the brain, the tingling that comes in the scalp, in the fingers and toes is dreadful. The child turns and twists and screeches and cries, and it requires an iron hand on the part of the doctor to hold the mother from doing something to hush that cry. For just so sure as that is done, that child will go back into death. That is a reaction. So that all over the benumbed parts, or where the blood begins to flow, into parts where the circulation has been feeble, where the nerves take on sensation again, we have reaction, which is but the result of that turning into order. And this reaction turns the bad affection into order. That part has been benumbed and dead, and when the circulation takes place in the part in order to repair its tissue, we have reaction, which is attended with distress. So if the physician cannot look upon that and bear it, he will have trouble. If the physician thinks it is an indication for another remedy, it will spoil his case. We must discriminate between that which is reaction and that which calls for a remedy. These things are only seen in homeopathy, never in any other practice. So here comes the great importance of the remedy reaction, whether it's the remedy reaction or it is the aggravation of the symptoms and it's not because of the remedy. Sometimes what happens is the physician will be driven to his wits, and in dealing with these reactions, it is sometimes a dreadful thing to look upon, and the physician may be turned out of doors. For example, let him meet as a man. Let him be a patient with it, because the ignorance of the mother or the friends can be no excuse for his violation of principle even once. So we understand that when it is the homeopathic aggravation, this intensification of the symptoms, that the patient is suffering. And those intensification of the symptoms, if they are for a short time, and after the symptoms pass, the patient feels better, then we can say it to be a homeopathic aggravation. But the remedy cannot give him symptoms that he has not. It is a very important line that you have to keep in mind. The remedy that we will give should give the symptoms that he already have. But if new symptoms appear, then we think that there is something wrong with our prescription, because it cannot give him symptoms that are not related to him except in those cases that are called oversensitives, that we have already discussed in the previous module about idiosyncrasy. Oversensitives, are such a capable of proving everything that comes along. So these are the oversensitive, the idiosyncratic people, that they keep on proving every medicine they give. The thing that we must know is whether the patient is oversensitive and proving the drug, or whether he has a vigorous constitution and is getting an aggravation. The remedy will be exaggerated in oversensitives and sometimes in those of weakly constitution, especially those with a very narrow receding chin, those who have sunken eyes, those who have senility marked in the eyes. And the next paragraph continues this one to a certain extent. As we see in the paragraph 155 of the Organon, Hahnemann says, I say without any degree of suffering, because when a perfect homeopathic remedy acts upon the body, it is nothing more than the symptoms, analogous to those of the disease, laboring to surmount and annihilate these latter by usurping their place. This is only speaking from experience. So like most of the time we think that if the reaction is not happening, we repeat the remedy. Repetition of the remedy has to be done with a lot of care, because if the delirium subsides or a moisture comes upon the skin and he slumbers placidly, the medicine should never be given beyond such a state. There are times in diphtheria when the repetition of the remedy will kill, and there are times where repetition will save life. So we have to be a very keen observer where we have to repeat and where we should not repeat, because it's the thing about aggravation. So next I would like to cite the paragraph number 158, where Hahnemann said, this trifling homeopathic aggravation of the malady during the first few hours, the happy omen which announces that the acute disease will soon be cured and that it will for the most part yield to a first dose. So here we get the importance of the first dose and how important the first prescription is for the patient, because after the first prescription only, after its action, we can find a remedy reaction. And we have to find whether this remedy reaction is a homeopathic aggravation or it is a medicinal aggravation. So we have to peep very keenly into the case. That a natural disease can destroy another by exceeding it in power and intensity, but above all things by its similarity. We have been talking all about the similarity, because similarity is the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So that when this slight aggravation occurs, you will seldom, if ever, have to give another dose in an acute disease. When this aggravation does not come, when there is not the slightest aggravation of the symptoms, and the patient appears to be gradually better after the remedy, then it is that the remedy shows that it has not acted upon the same depth, and that relief may cease in the case of an acute disease. And when that relief ceases, the reaction has ceased, and then another dose of medicine is correct practice. So this is a very important paragraph where we come to know, as we have learned, that what happens when we give the remedy and there is no aggravation at all, but the patient starts feeling better. But if there is not at all any slightest aggravation, then there was some error, and this possibility that the relief of the patient will cease after some time. I would like to add to this that relief that begins without any aggravation of the symptoms does not last so long in an acute disease as when an aggravation has taken place. So homeopathic aggravation has to be there. A slight action of the remedy over and above the disease is a good sign. Again, you will find if your remedy was not perfectly similar, you will not get an aggravation except in oversensitive patients, and then it is a medicinal aggravation. So it's a very important point that we have to remember, the medicinal aggravation. When you find that you get no aggravation of the symptoms in a good vigorous constitution, none at all, very often your remedy has been only partially similar, and it may require 2 or 3 of such partially similar remedies to finish the case. If you will observe the work of ordinary physicians, you will notice they give 2 or 3 remedies to get their patients through, where a master gives but 1. So this is the difference between the master's prescription, because we have to follow the rules of homeopathy and give the single dose. Now again, I would like to cite the paragraph number 159, where Dr. Hahnemann speaks about the smallness of the dose. He says that the smaller the dose of the homeopathic remedy, the slighter the apparent aggravation of the disease, and it is proportionately of shorter duration. So this is what he talks about, the homeopathic aggravation. This was written at the time of Hahnemann's experience with what might be called small doses, ranging from the lower potencies to the 30th and seldom much higher. He had ample experience with the 30th and occasionally with the 60th potency, but not with the tremendous turmoil that comes from the very highest attenuations. It reads in the correct translation of it: the smaller the dose is of the homeopathic medicine, the less and shorter is the aggravation in the first hours. It might be considered to mean an apparent aggravation or an apparent aggravation of the disease. Now Hahnemann observes, as you will find amongst several of his writings, that the disease itself is actually intensified and made worse by the remedy. If the remedy be precisely similar, but if we pass away from the crudity of the medicines ranging up to the 30th potency, we get a milder action, and it has a deeper curative action. And the smaller the dose of the homeopathic medicine, the less and the shorter is the aggravation. The idea is that there is an aggravation in the first hours. That is a matter that the paragraph itself admits. Now also I would like to add in this the paragraph number 160 of the Organon, where he says that we are accused nowadays of having departed from Hahnemann. Hahnemann wrote of the 30th potency in one of the stages of his life as sufficiently high and sufficiently low. We can easily see that it was in the earlier period of his investigation that he made the remark that potentizing must end somewhere. Sometimes we are accused departing from Hahnemann because we give different doses from what Hahnemann gave. Now I want to show you that this is not true, because when we read paragraph 279, it has been written, it has been fully proved by pure experiments that when a disease does not evidently depend upon the impaired state of an important organ, the dose of the homeopathic remedy can never be sufficiently small so as to be inferior to the power of the natural disease, which it can at least partially extinguish and cure, provides it be capable of producing only a smaller increase of symptom immediately after it is administered. Now if we go to the 200th potency and find that will aggravate, if you go to the 50 millisiemal and find that that will aggravate, that they still have the power to intensify the symptoms, the remedy has just the same curative power in it. Again, I would like to cite the organon aphorism number 280 as it has been cited in the Kant's philosophy. This incontrovertible axiom founded upon experience will serve as a rule by which the doses of all homeopathic medicines without exception are to be attenuated to such a degree that after being introduced into the body they shall merely produce an almost insensible aggravation of the disease. It is of little importance whether the attenuation goes so far as to appear almost impossible to ordinary physicians, whose minds feed on no other ideas but what are gross and material. All these arguments and vain assertions will be of little avail when opposed to be the doctrines of unerring experience. Unerring experience means the experience that have no errors. Now can there be any doubt of what Hahnemann meant when he speaks of the smallest dose? Can there be any doubt but that he means attenuation and attenuation up and up until we reach that point in the attenuation that we do not observe a slight aggravation of the symptoms? So again, he gave a nod to paragraph 249 and he says, all experience teaches us that scarcely any homeopathic medicine can be prepared in too minute a dose to produce perceptible benefit in a disease to which it is adapted. Hence, it would be an improper and an injurious practice when the medicine produces no good effect or an inconsiderable aggravation of the symptoms, after the manner of the old school, to repeat or increase the dose under the idea that it cannot prove serviceable on account of its minuteness. So the senses have no relation whatever to the minuteness of the dose, as we have seen that there was aggravation. And if there is homeopathic aggravation, then the prognosis of the patient will be favorable.